The silence between us. The first snow of the season dusted the neighborhood in delicate white, softening the edges of everything. The rooftops, the bare branches, the world itself. Inside their suburban home, however, the coldness was palpable. Evan stood by the kitchen window, his fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. He watched his wife, Madeline, brushing snow off her car, her movements brisk and precise. Even from this distance, he could see the tightness in her shoulders, the way she avoided looking back at the house. She hadn't met his gaze for days. His phone buzzed on the countertop. He didn't need to look to know who it was. "Are you going to tell her?" He deleted the message, his jaw clenching, as if it were that simple. The affair had started the way these things often do, with an unspoken need and a convenient opportunity. He hadn't meant for it to go so far, hadn't meant to find himself tangled in a web of lies. But then he never meant for Madeline to find out either. A few weeks ago, she'd discovered a text on his phone, one he'd been careless enough to leave unlocked. Her silence since then was worse than any fight they could have had. The front door opened, the cold air rushing in as Madeline stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the winter chill. She brushed past him without a word, the scent of her vanilla, perfume lingering as she hung her coat by the door. He could feel the distance between them, a chasm that widened with each passing day. "How was work?" he ventured, his voice cracking. She glanced at him, her green eyes colder than the snow. "Outside." "Fine." The word was clipped, a punctuation to end the conversation before it could begin. He watched as she moved about the kitchen, her actions mechanical, washing her hands, putting away groceries, starting dinner. They used to cook together, laugh, together share stories of their day. Now they were ghosts haunting the same house. His phone buzzed again. Another message. He turned it face down, his stomach knotting. Madeline's gaze flicked to the phone, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Work?" she asked, the accusation barely concealed. "Yeah," he lied. "Just some last-minute things." She nodded, her face unreadable. But he saw her hands trembling as she peeled a potato, her knuckles white with tension. Evan felt the words rising in his throat. Words that could either bridge the distance or shatter what remained. But they caught there, stuck behind fear and guilt. As she moved past him to grab a pot from the cupboard, he reached out, his fingers brushing her arm. "Maddie, I'm sorry." She froze, her back to him. For a moment, he thought she might turn around, might finally yell or cry or do anything other than this silent withdrawal. But she simply pulled away, resuming her task as if he hadn't spoken at all. "I have a meeting tonight," she said, her voice flat. "I'll be late." It wasn't a question, nor an invitation for conversation. It was a declaration, a boundary, and he was on the outside of it. After she left, the house felt hollow, the echoes of what once was reverberating off the walls. Evan sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, replaying every moment that had led them here. He thought about the first time he'd met Madeline, how she'd laughed at his terrible joke and made him feel like he was the only man in the room. He thought about their wedding day, the way she'd looked at him as if he was her forever. His phone buzzed again, a reminder of the choices he'd made. He picked it up, his thumb hovering over the message. "We need to talk. I'm late." His heart stopped. A wave of nausea rolled through him as the implications sank in. The affair had been a mistake, a desperate grasp at something that felt like escape. But this was a consequence he hadn't considered. He dropped the phone on the table, his hands trembling. What was he supposed to do now? The front door creaked open, and he looked up, his heart leaping at the thought of Madeline coming back. But it was just the wind, a cruel reminder that he was alone. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a different name, a friend from work. "Saw Maddie tonight. She was at Angelo's with some guy. Everything okay?" His blood ran cold. Angelo's was their restaurant, the place they went for anniversaries, birthdays, celebrations. Who was she there with? His chest tightened as jealousy, guilt, and fear twisted together. Was this her revenge? Had she found someone to replace him, the way he had tried to replace her? He had no right to feel betrayed, and yet the thought of her with someone else was unbearable. Evan grabbed his coat, keys jangling in his shaking hands. He had to know. He had to see for himself. When he pulled up to the restaurant, snow was falling heavier now, coating the windshield in a white haze. He peered through the glass, his eyes scanning the tables until he saw her. Madeline sat across from Evan at the kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea. She stared into the cup, watching the faint spirals of steam curl and vanish. Her eyes were rimmed red, exhaustion etched into the delicate lines of her face. Evan's chest tightened as he watched her. He wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to tell her he was sorry again and again until the words lost their meaning. But he knew that wouldn't be enough. Nothing would be enough. She broke the silence first. Why her? Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath the surface, a fragility that made him feel like a monster. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. It wasn't about her. It was about me. I felt lost, like I was drowning, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore. Madeline's lips tightened, a flash of anger in her eyes. So you reached for someone else? Evan's shoulders sagged. I know how selfish it sounds. It was selfish. I was weak, and I made the worst mistake of my life. She looked away, her fingers tightening around the mug. You didn't just betray me, Evan. You betrayed us. Everything we built. Everything we promised each other. Her voice wavered, the pain cracking through the words. He felt his throat tighten, his own eyes stinging. I know, and I hate myself for it. Every day, silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Madeline's gaze drifted to the window, where snowflakes danced against the glass. How long? She whispered. 3 months, he admitted, shame coloring his voice. It ended before you found out. I knew it was wrong. I knew it would. Destroy you. Destroy us. But I was too much of a coward to confess. Madeline's face crumpled, her shoulders shaking as she let out a soft, broken sob. Evan's heart shattered at the sound. He reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing hers, but she recoiled, pulling her hand back as if his touch burned. He dropped his hand, guilt crashing over him in waves. I never meant to hurt you. I swear, Maddie. I never stopped loving you. Her head snapped up, fury sparking in her eyes. Don't say that. You don't get to say that. You don't get to use love as an excuse for what you did. Her voice broke, raw with pain. If you loved me, how could you betray me like that? Evan had no answer. There was no justification, no explanation that could take away her pain. Madeline stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, hugging herself as she stared into the snowy night. Her reflection in the glass looked small, fragile. I can't even look at you without seeing it. Seeing her. I feel like I don't know who you are anymore. Her. Words pierced him, leaving him hollow. I'm still me, Maddie. I'm still the man who loves you, who wants to spend his life making this right. She laughed bitterly, a hollow sound. You can't fix this, Evan. You can't undo what you did. Her shoulders shook and she wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. The truth of it hung between them, heavy and unyielding. Trust once broken was nearly impossible to rebuild. And even if it was possible, would she even want to? Are you going to leave? The question came out hoarse, vulnerable. Evan's chest constricted at the thought of losing her. of coming home to an empty house, of living a life without her. Madeline didn't answer right away. Her eyes remained fixed on the snow, her breath fogging the glass. "I don't know. I can't even think straight right now. Every time I close my eyes, I see you with her. I feel sick. I feel shattered." Evan's vision blurred with tears. He didn't deserve to shed. "I'll do anything, Maddie. I'll go to counseling. I'll give you space. I'll fight every day to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life." She turned to face him, her expression weary, haunted. "And what if I can't forgive you? What then?" His throat tightened, his voice breaking. "Then I'll have to live with that, with losing the best thing that ever happened to me. And I won't blame you, not for a second." Her face crumpled, a sob escaping before she clamped her hand over her mouth. She stumbled back, her shoulders trembling as she tried to hold herself together. Evan wanted to go to her, to hold her and promise her that they could survive this. But he knew his touch would only bring more pain. He could see it in her eyes, the distance, the shattered trust, the love that was fading beneath the weight of his betrayal. Madeline took a shaky breath, wiping her tears. "I need time to figure out what I want, what I can live with." Evan nodded, his heart splintering. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait, however long it takes." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if trying to see the man she used to love beneath the stranger he'd become. Her eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of the love they once shared, before the pain consumed her again. Days turned into weeks, and the house became a place of whispers and ghosts. Madeline and Evan moved around each other like shadows, careful not to touch, not to linger too long in the same room. Conversations were brief, necessary exchanges, questions about dinner, reminders about bills, updates about their daughter, Lily. But the words were hollow, stripped of warmth, echoing off the walls of a home that no longer felt like home. Madeline avoided the bedroom when Evan was there. She couldn't stand the sight of their bed, the place where they had once shared secrets, dreams, and laughter. Now it felt tainted, haunted by images she couldn't banish from her mind. She slept in the guest room, curled up beneath a cold, impersonal quilt, wishing for a peace that wouldn't come. Evan spent his nights awake, staring at the empty space where she used to sleep. He kept replaying her words in his mind, her voice raw and broken. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." It was the truth he feared the most. On the outside, they maintained a facade of normalcy. They attended Lily's school play together, sitting side by side but miles apart. They visited Madeline's parents for Sunday dinners, carefully avoiding each other's gaze. No one else knew the truth, not even their closest friends. The betrayal was a secret they kept buried, festering between them like a wound that refused to heal. Madeline threw herself into work, staying late at the office, volunteering for projects just to avoid coming home. But no matter how late she stayed, the ache followed her. She'd catch herself staring at her phone, fighting the impulse to check Evan's messages, his emails, to look for any sign that he was still lying. But she couldn't bring herself to invade his privacy. Not because she trusted him, but because she was terrified of what she might find. Evan tried to give her space, tried to prove he was changing. He attended therapy, read books about rebuilding trust, and even started journaling. His thoughts, something he'd never done before. But nothing seemed to reach her. She was drifting further away, and he didn't know how to hold on. Then one evening, Madeline came home to find Evan in the living room, a stack of papers spread across the coffee table. His laptop was open, spreadsheets and financial statements, glowing on the screen. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice weary. He looked up, startled. I've been going through everything. Our finances, our investments. I realized I haven't been transparent. Not just about the affair, but about everything. I want you to see it all. No more secrets. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. Why now? Because I need to earn back your trust. And I can't do that if I'm still hiding things from you. His eyes were earnest, pleading. I don't want to be that person anymore, Maddie. I don't want to be the man who keeps you in the dark. She hesitated, the walls around her heart wavering. Part of her wanted to believe him, to believe that he was changing. But another part of her remembered the lies, the betrayal, and her heart hardened again. I'll look at it later, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I'm exhausted. Evan's shoulders slumped, disappointment flickering in his eyes, but he nodded. Okay. Whenever you're ready. She turned to leave, then paused. I'm meeting Lauren tomorrow after work, for dinner. His face fell, but he forced a smile. That's good. You should get out, see your friends. She could see the pain in his eyes, the way he tried to hide it. She wondered if it hurt him to know that she found comfort with other people, with anyone but him. And then she wondered why she even cared. Madeline spent the next evening at a quiet cafe downtown, sitting across from Lauren, her oldest friend. The warm, dim lights cast a soft glow over their table, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering. In the air, Lauren studied her, concern etched into her face. You look exhausted, Mads. Are you okay? Madeline hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She hadn't told anyone about the affair. She didn't want the pity, the whispered judgments, the questions she couldn't answer. But the weight of it all was suffocating. We're having problems, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Big problems. Lauren's eyes softened. Is it serious? Madeline felt a lump in her throat. Yeah, it's serious. Her vision blurred, and she blinked back tears. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if I want to. Lauren reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Whatever it is, I'm here for you. No judgment. Just whatever you need. Madeline's heart ached at the kindness. She wanted to pour everything out, to let someone else carry the burden for just a moment. But the words wouldn't come. Thanks. Lauren, I just need some time to figure things out. They spent the rest of the evening talking about safer things. Weeks passed, and the limbo between them grew more unbearable. Madeline and Evan were trapped in a cycle of silence, broken only by short, obligatory conversations. Their house was immaculate, almost sterile, each room meticulously organized, as if cleaning could restore the order they'd lost. Madeline went through the motions, work, parenting, chores, but inside, she felt hollow. She had always been decisive, practical, the one who solved problems. But this was different. There was no guidebook for a broken heart. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, she found Evan in the kitchen, washing dishes. His shoulders were tense, his movements mechanical, eyes fixed on the sink. For a moment, she watched him, the familiar slope of his back, the slight curve of his shoulders. He looked so tired. She took a breath, forcing herself to speak. Evan, we need to talk. He froze, his fingers gripping the plate just a little too hard. Yeah, we do. He placed the plate on the drying rack and turned off the faucet, wiping his hands on a towel before facing her. Madeline leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a protective barrier. Whatever we're doing, it's not working. We can't keep living like this. Evan's eyes darkened. I know. His voice was low, strained. I don't know how to fix it. I'm trying, Maddie. I really am. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting nervously. I see that. I do. But I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if anything is enough. Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard. I don't know if I can forgive you. Evan's face crumbled, pain flashing across his eyes. I don't expect you to. Not yet. But I need you to know how sorry I am. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I'll spend every day trying to make up for it. Madeline shook her head, anger bubbling up. You can't just fix this. You broke us, Evan. You shattered everything we built. Her voice wavered, tears burning her eyes. I can't even look at you without seeing her, without wondering if you loved her, if she meant more to you than I do. He looked horrified. No. Never. It was never about love. It was stupid, selfish. A way to escape feeling like I was failing at everything. But it was never about her. It was never about not loving you. Madeline's face twisted in pain. Then why wasn't I enough? His shoulders sagged, defeat washing over him. It wasn't about you. It was about me. My own insecurities. My own failures. You were always more than enough. I was the one who wasn't. Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Madeline's heart pounded, raw and aching. She wanted to believe him, wanted to find a way to erase the hurt. But the betrayal ran too deep, the wound still fresh and bleeding. She took a step back, shaking her head. I don't know if I can do this, Evan. I don't know if I can keep living in this house, pretending that everything's okay. I need space. I need time to figure out what I want. His face went pale. Are you saying you want a separation? Her chest tightened. I don't know. Maybe. I need to breathe. To think. Evan's eyes were wide, panic setting in. Maddie, please, don't do this. Don't give up on us. Her resolve wavered, pain slicing through her. She still loved him. Even after everything, even after the lies, she still loved him. And she hated herself for it. I don't want to give up, she whispered. But I can't keep pretending either. I need to figure out if I can forgive you, or if it's too late. His shoulders slumped, his head bowing. I'll do whatever you need. If you want me to leave for a while, if you need space, I'll do it. Just, please don't close the door on us yet. Madeline's heart twisted. She didn't have an answer. She didn't know if there was a way back, if she could ever look at him without seeing the betrayal. But she also didn't know if she could live without him. I need time, she repeated, her voice breaking. That's all I can promise right now. Evan's face crumpled, tears glistening in his eyes. He looked defeated, lost. Okay. Time. I can give you that. She turned away, blinking back tears as she walked upstairs, her heart heavy with uncertainty. As she curled up in the guest room bed, staring at the ceiling, she felt the ache of loss settle deep within her. She was mourning something that wasn't dead yet, something that was still fighting to survive. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall. She didn't know how this would end, if they would find a way to rebuild, or if this was the beginning of the end. All she knew was that she was tired of pretending, tired of hurting. Downstairs, Evan sat alone in the dark, his heart shattered. He realized that sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes, no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't fix what you'd broken. And the hardest part was knowing that it was his fault. The house was silent, haunted by memories of laughter and warmth, echoes of a life they once shared. The days that followed were agonizingly quiet. Evan moved through the house like a ghost, his presence barely more than a whisper. He tried to give Madeline the space she needed, staying out of her way, but every glance at her hollow eyes felt like a knife twisting deeper. Madeline threw herself into her work, drowning in spreadsheets and meetings. But every quiet moment brought a wave of pain crashing down, memories of happier times clawing at her. She missed him, missed the man he used to be, the man she thought she knew. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, her phone buzzed. It was Sarah, her sister, who had been checking in ever since the truth came out. Madeline hesitated before answering. Hey. Hey, Maddie, how are you holding up? Sarah's voice was gentle, laced with worry. Madeline tried to sound strong, but her voice cracked. I don't know. I feel like I'm stuck. Like I can't move forward, but I can't go back either, Sarah sighed. That's normal. You went through a huge betrayal. It's going to take time. Madeline's eyes burned. I want to hate him. I want to scream at him, but I can't. I keep thinking about how he looked at me when I asked for space. How broken he was. How could he do this to us? To me? There was a pause before Sarah spoke. People do stupid things when they're hurting, when they feel lost. It doesn't excuse what he did, but maybe it helps explain why. Madeline's chest tightened. I keep asking myself if we can ever get past this, if I can ever trust him again. That's something only you can decide, Sarah said softly. But whatever you choose, I'll be here for you. Madeline swallowed the lump in her throat. Thanks, Sarah. After they hung up, Madeline sat in the dark, tears slipping down her cheeks. She hated how conflicted she felt. She was supposed to be stronger than this, but the pain was relentless, tearing her apart piece by piece. She thought about the man she had fallen in love with, the father of her child, the partner she had built a life with. She missed him desperately, but she didn't know if she could ever forgive him. As the days blurred together, Madeline finally made a decision. She couldn't keep pretending. She needed answers. She needed closure. She found Evan in the backyard, raking leaves under the dim evening light. His shoulders were hunched, his movements heavy, as if the weight of his guilt was too much to bear. Evan, she called out, her voice firm. He turned, eyes wide with surprise. She crossed her arms, holding herself together. We need to talk. I need to know everything. He swallowed hard, his face pale. I told you everything. No, she said, her voice unwavering. You told me about the affair, but you didn't tell me why. I need to understand why you did this to us. To me. I need to hear the truth, no matter how ugly it is. Evan looked away, his jaw tightening. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then his shoulders sagged. Okay, I owe you that much. They went inside, sitting across from each other at the dining room table, the distance between them feeling insurmountable. Evan's hands trembled as he spoke, his voice raw and broken. It started after my dad died. I didn't know how to handle it. I felt like I was falling apart, and I didn't want you to see me like that. I didn't want you to think I was weak. Madeline's heart ached, remembering how distant he had been, how he'd shut her out. Why didn't you come to me? He looked down, shame twisting his features. I didn't know how. You were always so strong, so put together. And I felt like I was failing at everything. At work, at being a husband, at being a father. I felt like I was drowning. Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. So you turned to her? Evan's shoulders shook. It wasn't about her. It was about escaping. About feeling like I wasn't. A failure for a little while. She didn't expect anything from me. She didn't see me as broken. Madeline's jaw clenched, anger flaring. So you betrayed me because I expected you to be an adult? Because I counted on you? His face crumpled, tears slipping down his cheeks. I know it sounds selfish, because it was. I was selfish and weak, and I ruined everything. Madeline looked away, her heart shattering. Did you love her? His head snapped up, panic in his eyes. No, never. It was never about love. It was a stupid escape. A way to feel less worthless. But it meant nothing. Her chest tightened, pain radiating through her. It meant nothing. It destroyed us, Evan. It destroyed me. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. I know, and I hate myself for it. I hate that I hurt you, that I broke the only good thing in my life. Madeline's hands were trembling. Do you understand how hard it is for me to even look at you? To hear you say you love me when you betrayed me like that? Evan looked up, his face pale and haunted. I understand, and I'll never stop regretting it. But I still love you, Maddie. Weeks passed, and the silence in the house grew heavier, suffocating. Evan slept on the couch every night, his presence a haunting reminder of the life they once shared. Madeline felt trapped between love and betrayal, her heart torn apart by the man she used to trust unconditionally. She tried to focus on Mia, pouring her energy into being a good mother. But even Mia could sense the tension, her bright eyes clouded with confusion as she watched her parents tiptoe around each other. One evening, after putting Mia to bed, Madeline stood in the hallway, staring at the family photos lining the walls. Smiling faces frozen in time, moments of happiness that felt like cruel illusions now. Her fingers brushed over the glass, lingering on a photo of Evan holding Mia as a newborn, his eyes brimming with joy. Why did you do this to us? She whispered, her voice cracking. She turned to find Evan standing at the foot of the stairs, his expression hollow. I ask myself that every day. Madeline's chest tightened, anger boiling beneath the surface. Do you even understand what you've done? How much you've destroyed? His shoulders slumped, his face etched with pain. I understand, and I hate myself for it. She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. I trusted you. With everything. How am I supposed to get that back? Evan took a step closer, his voice trembling. I don't know, but I want to try. I want to fix this. I want to be better. For you and for Mia. Madeline looked away, her heart aching. I don't know if that's possible. Evan's face fell, his eyes pleading. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. Madeline's throat tightened. You already did. She walked past him, her footsteps echoing through the silent house. Evan stood there, his heart breaking, knowing he had no one to blame but himself. The next morning, Madeline sat at the kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as she stared at the empty chair across from her. She remembered all the mornings they'd spent laughing over breakfast, sharing dreams and fears. Those memories felt like ghosts now, taunting her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. It was a text from Sarah. How are you holding up? Want to grab lunch this weekend? Madeline hesitated before typing back. Yeah, I could use the distraction. She needed to get out of this house, away from the constant reminders of what she'd lost. Later. That week, she met Sarah at a cafe downtown, the bustling noise a welcome break from the suffocating silence at home. Sarah hugged her tightly. You look exhausted, Maddie. Madeline managed a weak smile. I feel it. They sat down, and Madeline stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to try and work things out, but the other part of me feels like I'll never be able to trust him again. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing her hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you, but you need to do what's best for you, and for Mia. Madeline's eyes filled with tears. How am I supposed to explain this to her? How do I tell my little girl that her father broke our family? Sarah's expression softened. You don't. Not yet. She's too young to understand. Just be there for her like you always are. And whatever happens between you and Evan, make sure she knows she's loved. Madeline wiped her tears, nodding. I just feel so lost. It's okay to feel that way, Sarah whispered. Just take it one day at a time. Madeline tried to smile, but the weight in her chest refused to lift. She didn't know how to move forward when every step felt like she was walking through shattered glass. That night, Madeline found Evan in the kitchen, washing dishes. She hesitated, watching him move slowly, his shoulders hunched with exhaustion. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" Evan froze, his back stiffening. He set the plate down, his hands shaking. "I was ashamed. I didn't want you to see me like that, weak and broken." Madeline's heart ached. "We were supposed to be a team. We were supposed to share everything. The good and the bad." Evan turned to face her, his eyes glistening. "I know, but I didn't want to be a burden. You were always so strong, and I felt like I was falling apart." Madeline's anger flared. "So you turned to someone else instead of trusting me?" His face crumpled. "I made the worst mistake of my life, because I was too much of a coward to be honest with you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Madeline's chest tightened. "You didn't just betray me. You shattered my sense of security. You took away the one thing I thought was unbreakable." Evan's voice broke. "I know, and I'll never be able to fix that." They stood there, in painful silence, the weight of his betrayal suffocating them both. Madeline wiped away her tears. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I don't want Mia to grow up in a broken home." Days turned into weeks, and the fragile truce between Madeline and Evan was tested by every awkward conversation, every cautious interaction. They navigated their new reality with tentative steps, careful not to reopen wounds that were still bleeding beneath the surface. Evan started going to therapy, just as he promised. He invited Madeline to join him, but she refused at first, too raw and angry to sit in a room and dissect their broken marriage. Instead, she focused on Mia, maintaining routines to give her daughter a sense of stability amidst the turmoil. But every night, when the house fell silent and she was alone with her thoughts, Madeline found herself questioning everything. She'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories that once brought her joy, but now only reminded her of the betrayal. She wanted to believe Evan was sincere. She could see the changes in him. His effort to communicate better, his commitment to being present for Mia, the way he no longer recoiled from his own emotions. But every time she looked at him, all she could see was him with her. The other woman. The one who had invaded their lives, shattered their trust, and left Madeline questioning her own worth. One night, Madeline finally broke her silence. "Who was she?" Evan looked up from the dining table, his face pale. "Maddie." "We don't have to—" "I need to know," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "I need to know who she was and why you chose her over me." Evan's shoulders slumped. He hesitated, his eyes filled with shame. "Her name was Leah. She was a co-worker. Someone who listened when I felt like I was drowning." Madeline's stomach turned. "So what? I wasn't enough? You couldn't talk to me?" "It wasn't about you," Evan whispered, his voice breaking. "It was never about you. I was falling apart, and I didn't want you to see me that way. I thought I had to be strong for you. For Mia. But I was lying to myself. I was weak, and I looked for comfort in the wrong place." Madeline's chest tightened. "Did you love her?" Evan's face contorted in pain. "No, it was never love. It was an escape, a way to numb the fear and loneliness I felt inside." Madeline's eyes stung with tears. "And what about me? What about the loneliness you left me with?" Evan's face crumbled, his hands shaking. "I was selfish, and I was wrong. I hurt you in ways I can never take back. And I hate myself for it every single day." Madeline looked away, her heart aching. "Do you still see her?" "No," Evan said quickly, his voice firm. "I ended it the moment you found out. I cut all ties. I haven't spoken to her since. Madeline felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly swallowed by anger. Why did you do it? Was I not good enough? Was our life not enough? Evan shook his head, his eyes pleading. You were everything to me. You still are. I was broken, Maddie, and instead of facing my pain, I ran from it. I ran from you because I was too ashamed to admit that I was struggling. But it was never about you not being enough. It was about me not being enough. Madeline's heart twisted. You should have come to me. We could have faced it together. Evan's voice broke. I know. And I'll regret not doing that for the rest of my life. They stood in painful silence, the weight of his words settling between them. Madeline could see his remorse, his self-loathing, but she didn't know if that was enough to heal the wounds he'd caused. The next day, Madeline agreed to attend a therapy session with Evan. She walked into the room with her guard up, her heart heavy with resentment. But as she listened to Evan open up about his fears, his insecurities, and his self-destructive spiral, she saw a side of him she hadn't known before, a vulnerable man who had been lost in his own pain. It didn't excuse his betrayal, but it gave her a glimpse into the cracks that had been hidden beneath his facade of strength. The therapist turned to her, her voice gentle. Madeline, how did hearing Evan's perspective make you feel? Madeline hesitated, her emotions tangled. Angry, sad, but also confused. I thought I knew him. I thought we were happy, but now I don't know what was real and what was just a lie. Evan's face fell, his voice trembling. Our life together was real, Maddie. Everything we built, everything we shared, it was real. I was the one living a lie because I was too afraid to show you my pain. But I never stopped loving you. Madeline's throat tightened. Then why did you risk everything? Why did you risk us? Evan looked down, his shoulders shaking. Because I was a coward. I took the easy way out, and I destroyed the one thing that mattered most to me. Tears slid down Madeline's cheeks. You destroyed me too. The room grew quiet. Her words hanging heavy in the air. Evan looked up, his eyes raw with pain. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. If you'll let me. Madeline looked away, her heart aching. In the weeks that followed, Madeline and Evan navigated the fragile terrain of their new reality. Therapy became a weekly ritual, a place where they confronted painful truths and unearthed long-buried fears. Each session felt like walking through fire, but with every step, they shed layers of resentment and confusion. Madeline learned to voice her anger, her hurt, her doubts without fear of breaking apart. She spoke of the nights she cried herself to sleep, the moments she looked at Evan and saw only betrayal, the days she wondered if she'd ever trust him again. Evan listened, absorbing every word with a humility that surprised her. He stopped, making excuses, and started owning his mistakes. He faced his insecurities, his self-loathing, his fear of vulnerability. Slowly, he began to rebuild his identity piece by piece. Yet, the road to healing was anything but linear. There were days when Madeline's anger resurfaced with a vengeance, days when she couldn't bear to look at him without seeing Leah's shadow. There were nights when the ache of betrayal was too heavy to bear, when the temptation to walk away threatened to consume her. But there were also moments of hope. Like the afternoon they took Mia to the park, and for a fleeting moment, they felt like a family again. Or the evening they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset in a comfortable silence that reminded Madeline of simpler times. Still, forgiveness was elusive. It hung between them like a distant mirage, visible but just, out of reach. One evening, as they stood in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, Madeline broke the silence. Do you still think about her? Evan froze, his hands submerged in soapy water. No, he answered softly. Not anymore. I regret what I did, but I don't miss her. I miss us, who we used to be." Madeline looked away, her throat tight. "Sometimes I feel like I don't know who we were, or who we are now." Evan turned off the faucet, drying his hands before facing her. "We're broken, Maddie, but we're still here." "We're still trying, and that means something, doesn't it?" Madeline met his gaze, searching for the man she fell in love with all those years ago. "I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we're just delaying the inevitable." Evan's face fell, pain flickering in his eyes. Do you want to give up?" Madeline's chest tightened. "I don't want to, but I don't know if I can forgive you either. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Evan took a shaky breath. "I understand, and I won't pressure you, but I'll keep fighting for us, for as long as you let me." Madeline's resolve wavered. She wanted to believe him, to believe that love could survive this. But the scars ran deep, and she didn't know if they would ever truly heal. 3 months later, Madeline sat across from Leah in a small cafe, her hands trembling around her cup of coffee. She had debated whether to do this for weeks, but she needed closure. She needed answers. Leah looked uncomfortable, guilt etched across her face. "I didn't think you'd actually want to meet." Madeline's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "I need to understand why. I need to know how it happened, and why you didn't care that he was married." Leah's eyes dropped to her lap. "I did care, but I was selfish. I was lonely and he was broken. I convinced myself that I was helping him, that I was saving him from himself. But the truth is, I was just using him to fill my own emptiness." Madeline's chest tightened. "Did you love him?" Leah looked up, pain in her eyes. "I thought I did, but looking back, I think I was just in love with the idea of being needed. It wasn't real. It was never real." Madeline's eyes stung with tears. "You destroyed my family. And for what? For a fantasy?" Leah's face crumbled. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish and foolish, and I regret it every day." Madeline's hands trembled. "Your regrets don't change what you did. They don't change the fact that you shattered my trust, my marriage, my life." Leah's eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I'll carry that guilt with me forever." Madeline stood up, her chest heaving. "I didn't come here for your apology. I came here to close this chapter, to take back my power. You don't get to live rent-free in my mind anymore." Leah looked down, her shoulders slumped. "I understand." Madeline turned to leave, her heart heavy but resolute. She had faced the other woman, confronted the betrayal, and taken the first step toward healing. Whether or not she could forgive Evan was still uncertain, but she was finally free of Leah's shadow. That night, Madeline sat with Evan on the couch, the tension between them palpable. She told him about the meeting, about the confrontation that had both hurt and freed her. Evan listened in silence, his face pale. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry for all of it." Madeline looked at him, her eyes weary. "I know, but sorry isn't enough." Weeks passed, and Madeline and Evan settled into an uneasy rhythm. They were careful with each other, their interactions tinged with a politeness that felt foreign, almost mechanical. They spoke mostly about Mia, her school projects, her playdates, her ballet lessons. She became their safe topic, the bridge that kept them connected even as a chasm of unresolved pain loomed between them. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Madeline's anger would flare unexpectedly, ignited by the smallest things, a forgotten errand, a missed text, a lingering look. It was as if every misstep became proof that Evan couldn't be trusted, that she was foolish to even try. One evening, after tucking Mia into bed, Madeline found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, holidays spent laughing and embracing. Her eyes lingered on one image in particular. Evan holding a 2-year-old Mia on his shoulders, his face lit up with pure joy. A sob caught in her throat, and she turned off the phone, burying her face in her hands. She missed that version of him, the man who made her feel safe, cherished, loved. The man she thought she knew, but that man was gone, replaced by a stranger who had lied, cheated, and shattered her world. The door creaked open, and Evan stepped in, his expression cautious. "Hey, I heard you crying. Are you okay?" Madeline looked up, her eyes red. "No, I'm not okay. I don't know if I'll ever be okay again." Evan's shoulders slumped, his face etched with guilt. "I'm sorry, Maddie. I wish I could take it all back." Madeline's anger flared. "You can't. You can't undo what you did. You can't erase the lies, the betrayal, the image of you with her." Her voice broke and she looked away, her chest heaving. "You broke me, Evan. You broke us." Evan's eyes glistened with tears. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But I'm trying, Maddie. I'm trying to be better, to earn back your trust." Madeline shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't know if that's even possible. How do I trust someone who looked me in the eye and lied for months? How do I forgive someone who betrayed me with a woman I thought was my friend?" Evan's face crumpled. "I don't have an answer, but I'm willing to keep trying, no matter how long it takes. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, to fix us." Madeline looked at him, her heart torn between love and pain. "I don't know if I want to fix this, or if I want to watch you suffer like you made me suffer." Evan looked down, his voice a whisper. "If that's what you need, I won't fight it. I deserve it." Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Madeline finally spoke, her voice soft. "I don't know what I need. I don't know what I want. But I know that I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I can't keep putting on a brave face for Mia when I'm falling apart inside." Evan took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "Then let's stop pretending. Let's be real with each other, even if it's ugly, even if it hurts. I'm here, Maddie. I'm not going anywhere." Madeline's resolve wavered. She wanted to push him away, to punish him for the pain he caused. But she also wanted to believe him, to believe that they could find a way through this darkness. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever love you the way I used to, but I'm willing to try." Evan's face softened, hope flickering in his eyes. "That's all I need. That chance. I promise I won't take it for granted." Madeline looked away, her chest tight. "Don't make promises you can't keep." Evan's face fell, but he nodded. "You're right. No more promises. Just actions. One day at a time." Madeline turned toward the window, her gaze fixed on the moonlit street outside. She didn't know what the future held, whether they would heal or if the wounds were too deep. But for now, they were still standing. And maybe, for the moment, that was enough. Months later, on a rainy afternoon, Madeline found herself sitting on the porch, a cup of tea in her hands. She watched the raindrops dance on the pavement, her mind drifting to the life they used to have, and the life they were trying to rebuild. She heard footsteps behind her, and Evan appeared, holding an umbrella. "Thought you might need this." Madeline looked up, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks." Evan hesitated before sitting beside her. "I know we have a long way to go, but I wanted to thank you for giving us a chance." Madeline's eyes softened. It's not easy, but I meant it when I said I was willing to try. For Mia, and maybe for us, too. Evan's face brightened. I'll keep working on earning your trust, however long it takes. Madeline looked away, her heart still guarded. Trust is fragile, Evan. Once it's broken, it takes more than words to fix it. Evan nodded, his gaze unwavering. I know, and I'm willing to put in the work, even if it takes a lifetime. They sat in silence, watching the rain fall. The days that followed were marked by cautious attempts at normalcy. Madeline and Evan moved around each other with a delicate awareness, as though the air between them was fragile glass that could shatter at the slightest misstep. They navigated shared routines, prepared meals together, and exchanged brief conversations that were careful, almost rehearsed. But underneath the surface, the wounds remained. Madeline couldn't stop the intrusive thoughts from creeping in at the most unexpected moments. While folding laundry, she'd picture Evan undressing with Vanessa. During dinner, she'd catch herself analyzing his every gesture, wondering if he was thinking of her. It was exhausting, this hypervigilance that had taken root in her heart. One evening, after putting Mia to bed, Madeline sat alone in the living room, her eyes fixed on the darkened window. Rain pattered against the glass, a soft rhythm that matched the ache in her chest. She barely registered Evan's presence until he sat down beside her, his movements tentative. Madeline, I was thinking, maybe we should go to counseling, together. His voice was low, careful. Madeline's jaw tightened. You think talking to a stranger will fix this? Evan looked down, his fingers twisting together. No. But maybe it'll help us understand how to get through it. How to talk to each other, without hurting more than we already have. Madeline closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging. She was so tired of hurting, so tired of feeling like a shadow of herself. I don't know if I'm ready for that, she admitted. I don't know if I can sit there and hear you talk about her, about what you did, and not break all over again. Evan's face crumpled. I never wanted to hurt you, Maddie. I never wanted any of this. She looked at him, her eyes hard. But you did. You chose this. You chose her. He flinched, the weight of her words settling between them. I chose wrong. I was weak, selfish, stupid, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Madeline's anger flared, her voice rising. You don't get to play the victim here, Evan. You did this to us. You did this to me. Her chest heaved, the pain rushing back like a tidal wave. I thought we were happy. I thought we were a family. Was it all a lie? Evan's eyes filled with tears. No, it wasn't a lie. I loved you. I still love you. I lost myself. I lost sight of what mattered. Madeline shook her head, her voice trembling. You didn't just lose sight, Evan. You threw it all away. For what? For excitement? For an escape? For someone who meant nothing? Evan's face fell. I don't have an excuse. I was selfish. I got caught up in feeling wanted, feeling important, but it was empty. It was nothing compared to what we have, to what we could still have. Madeline's throat tightened, her anger giving way to a familiar ache. You destroyed us, and now you want me to pick up the pieces? To pretend like we can just move on? Evan's voice broke. I don't want you to pretend. I just want a chance to try, to rebuild, to be the man you deserve. Madeline looked away, tears burning her eyes. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if I can ever look at you and not see her, not see the lies. Evan's shoulders slumped. I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life. But I don't want to lose you, Maddie. I don't want to lose our family. They sat in silence, the rain tapping against the window like a somber melody. Finally, Madeline spoke, her voice a whisper. Maybe we need time apart to figure out who we are without all this pain between us. Evan's face fell, his eyes wide with fear. Are you saying you want a separation? Madeline hesitated, her heart twisting. I don't know, but I need space. I need to breathe, to think. Evan looked down, his face pale. I'll do whatever you need, even if it means letting you go. Madeline's chest tightened. She didn't know if she was ready to let him go, but she also didn't know how to keep holding on. I'll stay, for Mia's sake. But I need distance, Evan. Emotional distance. I need time to heal. Without you hovering. Without you trying. To fix something that's already broken. Evan nodded, his face drawn. I understand. I'll give you space, as much as you need. They sat in silence, two people side by side, worlds apart. After a moment, Evan stood, his shoulders slumped. I'll sleep in the guest room. From now on. He looked at her, his eyes hollow. Good night, Maddie. Madeline didn't respond. She listened to his footsteps retreating down the hall, the sound of the guest room door clicking shut, and then she was alone, the rain whispering against the window, echoing the emptiness inside her. She didn't know if she would ever be able to forgive him, if she could ever mend the shattered pieces of her heart. But for the first time since the truth came out, she felt a flicker of clarity. The days blurred together in a haze of quiet tension. The house, once filled with the hum of shared routines, now felt like a hollow shell. Madeline moved through the motions of daily life, taking care of Mia, managing her work. But everything was muted as if she were living in a dream where nothing was quite real. She had no idea what she was doing, no idea what was going to happen next. Every evening, Evan retreated to the guest room without a word, and Madeline would sit in the living room, staring at the same spot on the wall, lost in her thoughts. She hadn't told anyone about the separation, not even her closest friends. She was too ashamed, too unsure of what to say. In the moments when Mia wasn't around, the silence between them felt suffocating. Sometimes Evan would try to start a conversation, an awkward apology or a plea for understanding, but Madeline couldn't bring herself to respond. It was as though each word was another nail in the coffin of their marriage. Then, one Friday, evening? The phone rang. Madeline glanced at the caller ID. It was Vanessa. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from her in weeks. The last time they spoke, Vanessa had been insistent that everything was Evan's fault, that he had been the one to initiate everything. Madeline had let her words sting, but she knew deep down. Vanessa had been right. They had both been complicit in the affair. Madeline answered the phone, her voice steady despite the pit in her stomach. Hello? There was a pause on the other end. Madeline? Vanessa's voice sounded small, almost hesitant. It's Vanessa. I know this is probably the last thing you want, but I need to talk to you. Madeline's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what she expected, but it wasn't this. Talk to me? She echoed, her voice strained. What about? I need to apologize, Vanessa said quickly. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I owe you that much. Madeline clenched her jaw. You're right. You do owe me an apology, but I don't know if that changes anything. I know, Vanessa replied, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could just have fun. But then I realized I've been just as selfish as he has. I've ruined everything. And I'm sorry. I never should have gotten involved with him. Madeline closed her eyes, her heart pounding. It's not just him, Vanessa. It's both of you. You both tore my life apart. I know, Vanessa whispered, and I hate myself for it. But I don't want to hurt you anymore. I can't do this anymore, Madeline. I don't want to keep being the other woman. I don't want to be the one who destroyed someone else's family. Madeline's hand trembled as she gripped the phone. What are you saying, Vanessa? I'm saying I'm done, Vanessa said, her voice filled with regret. I'm walking away. I can't keep doing this. I don't want to be the reason you and Evan keep hurting. I've been a fool. I know I can't undo everything, but I can at least stop making it. Worse! For a moment, the words hung in the air, unspoken. Madeline didn't know what to say. She had imagined this conversation 100 times, rehearsed 100 ways to confront Vanessa, to let her know how much pain she'd caused. But now, it felt empty. There was no satisfaction in hearing Vanessa's remorse. You think walking away will fix this? Madeline asked, her voice hollow. You think I can just forget everything and pretend it didn't happen? You can't undo the damage. I know, Vanessa said quietly. I don't expect you to forgive me, Madeline. I needed to say I'm sorry. I hope someday maybe you'll understand, but I'm done. I can't keep being this person. The silence stretched out between them, both women lost in their own thoughts. Madeline's chest ached as the weight of everything settled in once more. There was no easy answer. There was no way to go back. Finally, Madeline spoke, again her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do anymore, Vanessa. I don't know if I can fix this, if I can fix me. I don't think you have to fix anything, Madeline, Vanessa said gently. You just have to decide what's right for you. Whatever that is, I'll support you, even if that means never seeing me again. Madeline felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. I don't know if I can forgive him, she said quietly. I don't know if I can forgive either of you. Vanessa's voice softened. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's just about finding peace for yourself. You don't have to let this define you. Madeline took a deep breath, the weight of Vanessa's words sinking in. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know if there would ever be a way back to a life where she could trust again. But she also knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living in the past. Goodbye, Vanessa, Madeline said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. The days grew quieter, almost suffocating in their stillness. Madeline's mornings had become a ritual of moving through the motions, getting Mia ready for school, sending her off with a kiss, and then retreating into her own thoughts. The house felt larger, emptier without the usual flow of conversation and routine. Evan would still be there, but always in the background, just out of reach. She had come to expect the silence between them like a thick fog that refused to lift. Evan had taken to working longer hours, as if burying himself in his job could erase the guilt he wore like a second skin. He'd leave before dawn and return late, never once pressing her for answers, respecting the space she'd demanded, at least in the way he knew how. But Madeline felt the absence of any real effort, and she wondered if it was easier for him to pretend everything was fine if he stayed busy enough. He didn't push, but he didn't fight either. It was like watching a man give up without ever saying the words. She wasn't sure what was worse, his avoidance or her own deep ambivalence toward him. She wanted to hate him for what he'd done. She wanted to tear down every memory they had shared, to let the bitterness consume her. But there was something about the quiet devastation in his eyes, the exhaustion in his posture, that kept her from fully unleashing her anger. Could she even trust herself to hate him? Did she want to? One night, long after Mia had gone to bed, Madeline found herself sitting on the back porch, staring at the dark sky. She hadn't intended to be out there, but the stillness had called to her. She reached for the glass of wine beside her, sipping it slowly as she let the cool night air settle over her skin. She heard the soft click of the back door, and knew without turning around that it was Evan. "You okay?" His voice was tentative, cautious. He had stopped asking that question in a way that suggested he thought he knew the answer. She shrugged, not willing to look at him, not willing to engage. The silence stretched between them, but this time, it didn't feel like a wall, it felt like a void. "I'm sorry," Evan said after a long pause, and Madeline's heart ached at how tired he sounded. "I'm sorry for everything. I know that's not enough, but I don't know how else to make up for what I've done." Her grip on the wine glass tightened as she finally turned to face him. He was standing in the doorway, his posture heavy, eyes downcast. He looked defeated. "I don't know if there is a way to make up for it," Madeline replied, her voice quiet but sharp. The weight of the betrayal had burned through her too many times for her to soften it now. "I don't know what forgiveness looks like, Evan. I don't know if I can ever forgive you." His face faltered, but he didn't leave. He never left. "I've been trying to figure that out too," he said. "What forgiveness even means. What it looks like. But I think it's something I'll never truly have unless you let me work for it. You don't owe me that, but I need you to know I'm not giving up on us. I don't expect anything from you right now, but I want to be here. I want to help however I can." Madeline's pulse quickened. His words, soaked with regret, were laced with a desperation she couldn't ignore. She should have told him to leave. She should have rejected him outright, but she didn't. Instead, she placed the glass down on the table beside her. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke next. "What if I can't forget? What if I can't ever look at you the same way again?" Evan took a step forward, his hands trembling at his sides. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn that back, if that's what it takes." She shook her head, the gravity of the situation settling in. "I don't know if I want that, Evan. I don't know if I want you back the way you are. You're not the man I married. Not anymore." His face fell, and Madeline felt an unexpected pang of guilt. She wanted to hate him, to burn the bridges between them until there was nothing left but ash. But the truth was, she wasn't sure who she was without him. Their lives had been intertwined for so long that the idea of unraveling it all felt impossible. Evan took another tentative step toward her. "I don't expect you to love me again. I don't expect to ever be the person I was. But I do think we can figure out who we are now. Who you are, who we are, after everything that's happened." She met his gaze then, and there was something in his eyes. A glimmer of the man she had once loved, buried beneath the guilt and the wreckage. It made her want to cry. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Evan. I don't know if I can look at you without seeing her," she whispered, the words breaking something deep inside her. "But I need to try. For me, for Mia. But I need time. I need space to figure out what this is. What we are." Evan nodded slowly, his face shadowed by sadness, but there was an understanding in his eyes. Days passed in a haze of conflicting emotions. Madeline tried to throw herself into her work, into her routines, but nothing felt the same anymore. Each moment seemed to be measured by the ticking of an invisible clock, counting down to the day, when she would have to make a decision, to move forward or to let go. Evan had kept his distance, respecting her need for space, but there was an undeniable shift in their household. When he was home, he was careful, almost too careful, watching her with a wariness that made Madeline uncomfortable. He was trying, but in a way, it felt like he was walking on eggshells, afraid to do or say something that would make everything worse. It was a Thursday evening when the shift happened. Evan had come home late from work, his tie askew, his shirt untucked. Madeline was in the kitchen, making dinner. Mia had already eaten and was in her room doing homework. The house felt quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath. Evan, stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching her move around the room, trying to muster the courage to speak. Madeline could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't turn. She couldn't bring herself to. "I know you don't want to talk about it," he finally said, his voice raw, as though the words were physically painful. "But I think about it all. The time, Maddie. I think about how I lost you, how I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever. But I can't keep pretending that everything is fine." Madeline stopped what she was doing, the knife still in her hand. She set it down slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't the first time Evan had spoken like this, apologizing, regretting. But this time, something was different. There was a quiet desperation in his voice, a vulnerability that shook her. He wasn't just saying the words to appease her. He was laying himself bare, admitting the depth of his regret. Turning to face him, Madeline's eyes searched his face, looking for some sign of the man she had once loved. But all she saw was exhaustion. His eyes were dark, haunted by the weight of his own guilt. "I don't know if I can forget, Evan," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever look at you and not see the betrayal." Evan closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. "I don't want you to forget," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want you to ever forget. I just want a chance to show you that I can be better. I want to be the man you thought I was, the man you married." Madeline's chest tightened. The words stung, but she knew he believed them. The problem was, she wasn't sure she believed him. She had heard the promises before, seen the remorse in his eyes. But the question that lingered in her mind, the question that had plagued her from the moment she found out about the affair, was whether any of it could ever truly be repaired. "Do you think I can ever trust you again?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Do you think I can ever look at you and not wonder if you're hiding something else? If there's more to it?" Evan's face twisted with pain. He took a step forward, as though he wanted to reach out to her but wasn't sure if he had the right. "I don't expect you to trust me right now. I know I've destroyed that, but I need you to know that I'm not hiding anything else from you. That's the truth." Madeline's heart fluttered painfully in her chest. She didn't know if she could believe him, but in that moment, she saw something in him, a quiet sincerity that made her question whether she was being fair. Was she holding on to the past too tightly? Was she punishing him because she was too afraid to forgive? She took a deep breath and looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't the man he had been, but he was also not the man he had become in the aftermath of his betrayal. He was something in between, lost, yes, but perhaps still salvageable. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. The confession felt like a weight lifting from her chest. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know if she wanted revenge or reconciliation or something in between. What she did know was that she couldn't keep living like this, trapped, between the memory of what had been and the uncertainty of what might come. Evan nodded, his expression softening. "I don't expect you to have all the answers, but I'll be here, waiting. I'll do whatever it takes, Maddie. Whatever it takes." Madeline didn't know what to say to that. So instead, she did the only thing that felt right. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Without a word, she reached up, placing a hand on his chest. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then slowly, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her into a gentle embrace. She could feel the weight of his regret, the rawness of his guilt. But she also felt something else, something fragile but present, the possibility of healing. The days that followed were quiet, deceptively so. They spent evenings together in a fragile sort of peace, tentative smiles and conversations that felt like they were walking on a tightrope, each word carefully chosen. Madeline found herself trying to balance the old habits with the new realities, doing things they once enjoyed together, like cooking dinner or watching TV, but always with the underlying awareness that something had irrevocably shifted between them. Evan, for his part, was determined. He did his best to be present, to make amends where he could. He had apologized countless times, but his actions, his consistent, steady presence, spoke louder than his words. Yet Madeline found herself still measuring him. Every move, every glance, every word he spoke was put under a microscope, weighed, and found wanting in some way. She was trying, but it was slow, exhausting work. Trust didn't come back in an instant, even when you wanted it to. One evening, as they sat on the couch, their daughter Mia's voice echoed from upstairs. "I don't know what's going on with you guys, but I don't like it." Evan sighed, but Madeline turned to look at him, her brow furrowed. "Mia heard?" "She's been listening more than we realize," he said, his tone weary but apologetic. "I think we've both been too consumed with everything else. We haven't even noticed how much she's been affected." "I know," Madeline whispered. "I didn't mean for it to spill out like that. She shouldn't have to carry our weight." They exchanged a long look. Both of them felt it. The pressure to put on a facade for Mia, the pressure to somehow shield her from the fallout of their broken marriage. But the truth was undeniable. The fracture between them wasn't something that could be hidden forever. "Maddie, what if we tell her?" Evan said, his voice tentative. "Maybe if she knows we're trying, really trying, she'll feel more secure. She'll know we're both still here." Madeline hesitated. There was a deep fear inside her that Mia's knowledge of the full extent of the betrayal would be one more thing that broke her. She didn't want her daughter to grow up seeing the cracks, understanding that love at times wasn't enough to hold everything together. But she also knew that pretending things were fine wasn't fair to Mia either. I think you're right," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But we need to be careful. I don't want her to feel like she has to pick sides." Evan nodded. "We'll figure it out together." The next evening, they sat Mia down. The conversation was uncomfortable, filled with long pauses and careful words. Mia, who was just on the cusp of becoming a teenager, looked at them with a mixture of confusion and concern. She could sense the tension, even if she didn't understand all the details. But when Madeline explained that things had changed, that they were working on healing but it would take time, Mia nodded solemnly. "I just want you both to be okay," Mia said quietly. The words laced with the vulnerability of a child who didn't fully understand the weight of adult emotions, but could feel it nonetheless. "We're going to be okay," Evan assured her, though Madeline wasn't entirely sure that was true. They weren't okay yet, but there was a possibility that together they could be. In the days that followed, Madeline wrestled with the ghost of what had been. She would sometimes catch herself thinking about the way their relationship had been before the affair, before the lies, before the betrayal. The longing for that version of their marriage was a constant ache, one that couldn't be erased. But there were moments when Evan's actions, his gestures, the way he still reached for her hand, made her think that maybe they could find their way back, even if it wasn't the same way. Still, there were nights when Madeline would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if forgiveness was a gift she could truly give. The idea of revenge, of walking away, of getting justice for the hurt Evan had caused, would creep into her mind, bitter and tempting. She could still feel the sting of betrayal, sharp and unrelenting, especially in moments of quiet when she was alone with her thoughts. It was difficult to silence the voice that whispered that maybe she deserved more, that she could have more, that Evan wasn't the man she had once believed him to be. But then there were moments when he would sit beside her, speak to her with tenderness, and she would remind herself that people could change, that people could learn, that they could grow. Could she allow him to grow alongside her? The real question, Madeline realized, was not whether Evan could change. It was whether she could change too. The following Sunday, Madeline went for a long walk by herself, trying to clear her mind. The neighborhood was quiet, the late afternoon sunlight slanting across the streets. As she walked, her thoughts spiraled, and she found herself at a crossroads. The next few weeks passed in a blur, each day feeling like a quiet negotiation between old wounds and tentative hope. The rhythms of their life together slowly returned, but they were different now. There was no going back to what it had been before. The trust, the innocence, the simplicity. That had been lost irrevocably. Yet, there was a new sort of tenderness between them, a softness that had not existed before the betrayal. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Madeline found herself observing Evan in ways she hadn't before. His gestures, his actions, the little things he did to show he was trying, staying up late to help with Mia's school project, bringing her favorite takeout when he sensed she was having a tough day, holding her hand when they sat in silence. Neither of them knowing quite what to say. She had to admit, he was trying harder than she had expected. But there were still nights when the ghosts of their past crept back, reminding her of what had been stolen from her. Trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered and harder to rebuild. On those nights, Madeline would lay awake, the ache in her chest a constant reminder that forgiveness was not an easy road. Could she ever truly forgive him for what he had done? Could they ever move forward without the weight of the past pulling them back? She didn't have the answers, not yet. Maybe she never would. Evan, too, was grappling with his own demons. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant presence in his thoughts. He had been given a second chance, but he knew the cost. He had betrayed the one person he had promised to love and cherish above all others. No amount of apologies or gestures could undo that. He had no illusions about that. All he could do was keep trying day by day to show Madeline that he was worthy of her love again. But he also knew that forgiveness wasn't something he could force. It had to come from her, in her own time, on her own terms. The tension between them, though lessened, was still there. It hung in the air, unspoken, but palpable. Every conversation, every glance, was filtered through the lens of their past. Even their most mundane exchanges felt charged with the weight of what had happened. One afternoon, as they sat together, in the kitchen, Mia's laughter echoing from the backyard, Evan spoke up, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking, I know it's not enough, but I want to make things right, Maddie. I want to rebuild what we had. If you'll let me." Madeline looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. She had heard him say those words before, but this time, there was something different in his voice. Something raw, something vulnerable. It made her pause. "I don't know if it's possible, Evan," she said softly, her eyes not quite meeting his. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did." He nodded, the understanding in his gaze evident. "I don't expect you to forget. I just want the chance to prove that I can be the man you thought I was, that I can be better than the man I was." For a moment, the silence between them stretched, thick with the weight of those words. Madeline could feel the uncertainty rising in her chest, but there was something else, too, a flicker of hope. It was fragile, just a tiny ember, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. "I don't know if I'm ready to make that choice yet," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this can go." Evan's face softened, a flicker of relief crossing his features. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and familiar, though still careful. "That's all I'm asking for, Maddie. Just a chance." As the days turned into weeks, the space between them grew more comfortable, though still laced with uncertainty. They didn't have all the answers, but they were taking small steps, moments of connection, of shared laughter, of silent understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and maybe, for now, that was enough. But then one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a knock at the door. Madeline opened it to find a familiar face standing on the doorstep. Claire, the woman Evan had been involved with. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Claire looked older, more tired than Madeline remembered, but there was a sharpness in her, eyes that didn't belong, an unsettling intensity that Madeline hadn't expected. "I need to talk to Evan," Claire said, her voice low and urgent. Madeline's pulse quickened. She glanced back at Evan, who had appeared behind her, his face a mix of shock and guilt. "This isn't the time," Madeline said, her voice firm. "You need to leave." But Claire didn't move, her eyes never leaving Evan's. "It's not over," she said, her words like a warning. "You think you've moved on, but you haven't. I haven't either. And I'm not going to let you pretend like this never happened." Madeline felt her chest tighten, her mind racing. Madeline stood in the doorway, the sound of Claire's retreating footsteps fading into the night. She didn't know how long she stood there, her hand still resting on the doorframe, the chill of the evening air seeping into the house. Inside, the silence felt suffocating. Evan's presence behind her was a weight that pressed down on her chest, and she knew he was waiting for her to turn around, to say something, anything. But what could she say? She felt betrayed again, not just by him, but by the circumstances that kept pulling them back into this tangled web. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words felt stuck, lodged in her throat, tangled with the fear that they weren't finished with Claire yet. When she finally turned to face Evan, he looked as shaken as she felt. His hands were fidgeting at his sides, the tension in his posture making it clear how much he wanted to explain, to calm things down, but nothing he could say would erase the lingering sense of danger. "She's right, you know," Madeline said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes never leaving his. "It's not over." Evan's face fell, the guilt written all over him. He moved toward her, as if he could bridge the distance between them with a touch. But Madeline took a step back, needing the space to think, to breathe. "I don't know what she means by that, but you have to believe me. I'm done with her," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "Madeline, I've made my choice. I'm here, with you. That's where I want to be." Madeline's heart wavered. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him, or at least she wanted to. But how could she, when someone like Claire could waltz back into their lives so easily, throwing their fragile stability into chaos? And how could she trust that Evan's commitment was real, when he had already proven just how quickly he could? Break her trust? "I want to believe you," she said softly, the ache in her voice betraying her uncertainty. "But after everything, how can I?" Evan swallowed hard, stepping closer. "You're right. I've already shattered that trust, but I swear to you I'm not the man I was. I'm here. I'm here with you. But this, Claire, whatever game she's playing, I'm done. I don't even know why she's here or what she thinks she can still do." Madeline's mind was racing. She had seen that kind of desperation in Claire's eyes, that sense of entitlement. Claire wasn't just a woman scorned. She was someone who couldn't let go. And that fear gnawed at Madeline's heart. "She won't stop, will she?" Madeline asked, more to herself than to him. Evan shook his head, his expression pained. "I don't know, Maddie, but I'm going to make sure she does. I'll make sure you're safe. Safe." The word echoed in her mind, but it felt hollow. Safe. She had believed that once, when she'd trusted Evan with everything. But now, safety felt like an illusion. "I don't want you to fix it, Evan," Madeline said, her voice firm, though the lump in her throat threatened to choke her. I don't want you to make it go away. I want you to prove it. Every day. To me. Evan's eyes softened, understanding dawning in them. I will. I promise you, Maddie. I'll prove it. The room seemed to close in around them, the air thick with unspoken promises, broken expectations, and an uncertain future. Madeline's thoughts swirled, but she couldn't bring herself to make any decisions. Not yet. They both knew it wasn't going to be easy. Healing rarely was. The next few days passed slowly, and the tension in the house grew thicker. They didn't talk much about Claire, neither of them knew how. There were moments of normalcy, brief flickers of what their life could have been. Evan taking Mia to her soccer game, Madeline cooking dinner, the hum of the washing machine as they went through the motions of life. But every time they locked eyes, there was a question hanging between them. A question neither of them knew how to answer. And then one evening, as Madeline was about to retire to bed, she found a letter tucked under her pillow. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the handwriting on the envelope. It was Claire's. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The words scrawled inside were simple, almost unsettlingly so. I'm not done. I'll never be done. You think Evan's the man you've always known, but he's not. He never was. Watch closely. I'll be waiting. The letter dropped from her hands as the weight of those words settled into her chest, the finality of Claire's threat unmistakable. She wanted to burn it, tear it up and throw it away, but something in her made her hold on to it. Something in her understood that Claire wasn't just a fleeting presence. She was a storm on the horizon, and no matter how much Madeline wanted to look away, she knew the storm was coming. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the letter, unsure of what to do next. Could she keep going down this path with Evan? Could they truly overcome the past, the lies, the betrayal? Madeline folded her hands tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup in front of her. Evan's voice, soft and earnest, felt distant now, like the words were sinking into a vast, empty well. We can't keep living in the past, he repeated, his voice tinged with desperation. I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend my whole life making it up to you. But please don't let her, Claire, drag us back to where we were. Madeline nodded absently, her mind consumed with the weight of the letter. It felt like Claire's presence was suffocating the space between her and Evan, the two of them trapped in a conversation they couldn't quite finish. Madeline, Evan urged, his voice breaking through her thoughts. I want to fix this. You and me. We're a team, right? That's what we've always been. She glanced up at him, the pain in his eyes unmistakable. She wanted to reach out, to tell him that she believed him, that she could forgive him. But the letter, Claire's words, still echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that there were secrets, untold things, lurking beneath the surface. I want to believe you, she said, her voice shaking just slightly. But she won't leave us, alone. You don't understand, Evan. She's relentless. She knows how to manipulate. She won't stop. And I don't know how to keep pretending everything's fine. Evan's face hardened, the frustration in his features becoming more apparent. Maddie, I swear to you, I'll handle this. I'll make sure Claire doesn't get in the way of our life. But you have to trust me. We can't keep living in fear of what she might do next. Madeline felt the pressure of his words pressing on her chest, suffocating her. Could she trust him? Could she trust them? And then, without warning, the phone rang. The sudden sound shattered the fragile moment they had created, and Madeline froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was an unknown number, but she couldn't help herself. She picked up the phone. Hello? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Pause. Then Claire's voice, smooth and cold, slid into her ear like ice. You think you're safe, don't you? Claire's words were venomous, but there was something detached about them, as though she was savoring each syllable. You think this little charade with Evan is going to work? You think I'm done? Madeline's stomach turned, but she kept her voice steady. What do you want, Claire? Claire laughed, a sound that sent a shiver down Madeline's spine. I just wanted to remind you that I never leave. You think Evan's going to protect you? Please, you're nothing more than a distraction. And distractions can be disposed of, just like everything else in this little charade of yours. Madeline's grip on the phone tightened, her mind racing. She could feel Evan's presence behind her, his eyes burning with a mix of confusion and fury. He had heard Claire's voice, heard the venom in her words, and now he was standing there, waiting for her to react. I'll make you regret it, Claire, Madeline said, her voice ice-cold. The words tasted foreign, but in that moment they felt right. I won't let you ruin my life anymore. You're done. Another laugh on the other end of the line, but it wasn't genuine. It was taunting, mocking. We'll see who's done. The line went dead. Madeline stood there, the phone still clutched in her trembling hand. She hadn't expected the call to hit so hard, but now the weight of Claire's threat was heavier than ever. She turned to face Evan, his eyes wide, filled with a mixture of shock and anger. He reached for her, his hand brushing against hers. That was Claire, wasn't it? His voice was low, strained with emotion. Madeline nodded, a chill running down her spine. She's not finished, Evan. She won't stop until she's burned everything to the ground, and we're just standing in her way. Evan swallowed hard, his expression darkening. He stood up straighter, a shift in his demeanor, as if a resolve had solidified within him. Then we'll burn back, together. Madeline didn't respond, immediately. The words felt hollow, as though there were too many layers of distrust to peel away. Could they really fight Claire together? Could Evan really protect her from whatever plan Claire had in mind? But she couldn't shake the feeling that they were both trapped in the same endless loop, trying to outrun Claire's grasp. The next few days were a blur of tension. Evan remained resolute in his commitment, his words unwavering as he tried to reassure Madeline. But Claire's shadow loomed over them, a constant presence in their lives. Madeline couldn't shake the feeling that Claire was always one step ahead, always watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, as the couple sat in their dimly lit living room, their conversation stalled, Evan's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He reached for it quickly, his face darkening as he read. The message. What is it? Madeline asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Madeline's breath caught in her throat as she looked at Evan, his expression tense, his eyes scanning the windows that lined the hallway. The sense of impending danger was palpable, more real than it had ever been. Their marriage, already fractured, now felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. Whether from the external threats or the internal wounds that Claire had inflicted, she wasn't sure. Who is it? Madeline asked, her voice tight. Evan didn't answer immediately. He moved cautiously toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. The car parked across the street was a sleek black sedan, its engine idling in the dim light of the early morning. It wasn't a car they recognized, and its presence felt too deliberate, too out of place. I don't know, Evan muttered. But it doesn't feel random. He glanced over his shoulder at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and resolve. I think Claire is sending a message. We can't ignore this anymore. Madeline's mind raced, the weight of the situation sinking in. Claire wasn't just playing with their lives from a distance anymore. She was making her presence known. And with that car sitting out there, it felt like an ominous signal of something worse to come. Should we call the police? Madeline asked, her heart pounding as she moved closer to Evan. She hated that her instincts were telling her this was just the beginning. What if it's Claire's doing? She could be trying to push us into a corner. Evan shook his head slowly. I don't want to escalate things with the police unless we absolutely have to. Not yet. But I think we need to find out who's behind this. We need to keep our heads about us. Madeline nodded, though her thoughts were scattered. She could feel the tension building between them, the fear of what Claire might be orchestrating, and the weight of their fractured trust pressing heavily on her chest. In all the chaos of betrayal, of trying to salvage their marriage and their lives, she hadn't considered what might be the final breaking point, the realization that Claire might destroy everything they had, piece by piece. "Do you think Mark is involved?" she asked suddenly, a knot tightening in her stomach as the thought hit her. "Do you think he's the one sending them?" Evan turned back toward her, his eyes searching her face. He hadn't said much about Mark since the phone call, but she knew he had questions too. If Claire had involved her brother, it wasn't just a matter of family betrayal anymore. It was about the lines that were being crossed. "I don't know," Evan replied, his voice carefully neutral. "But I wouldn't put it past her. If she's playing everyone against each other, we need to be careful. We can't trust anyone without knowing where their loyalties lie." Madeline felt a chill run down her spine as the weight of those words settled over her. Trust was a fragile thing, and right now, she didn't know who she could trust anymore. "I'll call Mark," she said, almost mechanically. "I'll try to get more out of him, but I think we need to confront him, both of us." Evan didn't argue. He simply nodded, his face tense as he took a step back toward the front door. "We'll do it together." As they stepped outside, the cool air hit Madeline like a slap to the face. The black sedan remained across the street, the engine still. Humming softly, the driver's side window slightly rolled down as if waiting for them to make the first move. Her stomach twisted in knots as they walked toward their car, every step feeling like they were inching closer to a confrontation they couldn't fully prepare for. Evan kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Madeline could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the unspoken question lingering between them. Are we doing the right thing? When they arrived at Mark's place, Madeline was already formulating what she needed to say, how she needed to confront him. But as they approached the front door, she felt a wave of doubt wash over her. What if he was in over his head, caught in Claire's web? Or worse, what if he was complicit in it all? Evan rang the doorbell, his face set in a grim expression. It didn't take long for Mark to answer, his casual demeanor masking the tension in his eyes. "Madeline, Evan," Mark said, stepping aside to let them in. "What's going on? You guys look tense." Madeline barely acknowledged the pleasantry, her mind racing. She had rehearsed what to say, but now that she was standing here, it felt almost impossible to find the right words. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but betraying a flicker of emotion. "I need to know what you're involved in with Claire. We know she's been playing games, and I need to know if you're part of it. If you're trying to help her take everything, from us, from me, you need to tell me right now." Mark's face shifted almost imperceptibly, the false calm cracking for just a second. Madeline didn't know how to feel as she walked away from Mark's apartment, her heart heavy with the weight of betrayal from every direction. Mark had just confessed to his role in Claire's manipulative game, yet there was no satisfaction in the admission, no sense of victory, only a gnawing ache in her chest. The threads of family were unraveling, and she wasn't sure if they could be stitched back together. Evan had been quiet since their conversation with Mark, his eyes fixed ahead as they walked back to the car. His silence was deafening, louder than any words they could exchange. Madeline broke the silence first, her voice hoarse, tinged with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "I don't know how to handle this, Evan. I never thought Mark would be involved like this." Evan's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the car door handle. "Neither did I. But I guess it makes sense, doesn't it? Claire's always been good at manipulating people. She's good at convincing them she's the victim. She probably played on Mark's guilt, made him feel like he owed her something." Madeline's mind was spinning. What had Claire told Mark to make him go this far? What strings had she pulled to get him to betray her so completely? The trust they'd once had, the closeness. Was it all a lie? Had Mark ever truly been the ally she thought he was? She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself, to center her thoughts. I don't know how to move forward from this. I don't even know if I can ever forgive him. Evan met her gaze, his expression softening just slightly. I know. But we can't let him destroy us. We can't let Claire win. The words were a harsh reality, and yet they were the truth. As much as Madeline wanted to scream and fall apart, she knew that if she didn't find a way to keep moving forward, Claire and her schemes would have won. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about taking control, finding a way to outsmart the people who were trying to tear everything down. I'll figure it out, Madeline said, her voice quiet but resolute. I just need some time to think. Evan nodded, understanding in his eyes, but the tension between them remained. There was still so much unsaid, so much unaddressed. As much as they were united in this fight against Claire, there was no denying the fractures. In their marriage, trust had been shattered between them, not just because of Claire's actions, but because of their own silence, things they had kept from each other, truths they had hidden in the hopes of avoiding pain. The drive home felt long, the air thick, with unspoken words, but Madeline couldn't bring herself to break the silence. She didn't know what to say. What could she say that would make any of this feel less like a nightmare? When they arrived home, Evan was the first to get out of the car. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if each step took more energy than the last. Madeline followed behind, her footsteps heavy as she entered their house, once a place of comfort, now a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. As she walked through the door, she felt the weight of the betrayal settle over her again. A suffocating pressure on her chest. Everything felt wrong. The house that had once felt like home now seemed empty, like a hollow shell of what it used to be. Evan was standing in the kitchen, his back turned, staring out the window into the darkening night. She watched him for a moment, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the distance between them, but part of her was scared. Scared that even if they tried to reconnect, it would never be the same again. Taking a deep breath, Madeline finally spoke, her voice low. Evan, I know I've been distant. I know we've been keeping secrets from each other. But we need to talk about this, about us, now. Evan turned around slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was a storm behind his gaze, a war raging inside him. He didn't speak right away, but the tension between them crackled like static. I know, he finally said. But I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if there's anything left to fix. Madeline felt a pang in her chest at his words. She had hoped for more, for something to hold on to, but she couldn't deny that a part of her had already started to wonder if this was the end. If this was how their story ended, split apart by lies, by betrayal, by the mistakes they both made. She swallowed hard, the tears threatening to spill over. I don't know either. I don't know if we can fix this. But I don't want to lose you, Evan. His eyes softened for a moment. But there was something in them that Madeline couldn't quite decipher. Regret, maybe. Pain. The same thing she was feeling, too. I don't know if I can forgive you, Maddie. I don't know if I can forgive myself, he said quietly. Madeline's heart cracked at his words. There it was, the chasm between them, growing wider with each passing second. She wanted to hold him, to fix everything. The days that followed were a strange limbo. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells, tentative, fragile. Madeline and Evan moved through their lives side by side, but the distance between them was palpable, a chasm that neither of them knew how to bridge. Madeline spent more time reflecting on everything, the things she had overlooked, the moments she had ignored. She had been so consumed by the weight of Claire's betrayal, so focused on holding on to the threads of the life she thought she had, that she hadn't truly looked at the cracks forming in her marriage. But now, in the aftermath, the cracks were all she could see. She had seen Evan's silence, his subtle avoidance, but had never questioned why he had pulled away. Had she been blind to her own role in their distance? The guilt gnawed at her. Evan, for his part, was quieter than ever. There were moments when she saw the spark in his eyes, the same spark he had when they first met, but it was fleeting, extinguished too quickly by the weight of everything they were carrying. His distance felt like an invisible wall, an unspoken barrier between them, but despite all the unspoken tension, they tried to move forward. They went through the motions of their daily life, dinners at the kitchen table, conversations that skimmed the surface but nothing more. The house had become a strange place of both comfort and discomfort, a place that should have felt like home, but now carried an undercurrent of tension. It was late one evening, the air thick with the quiet hum of the house, when Evan finally broke the silence. They had just finished dinner, the remnants of their meal still on the table, when he spoke, his voice low but heavy. "We need to talk," he said, his eyes locked on hers, steady and unwavering. Madeline's heart skipped, a beat. She had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. The words that followed were the last thing she expected, a twist she hadn't seen coming. "I've been thinking about everything, about us, and I realized something. We've been living in this limbo, waiting for things to go back to normal, but they won't. They can't," he said, his voice soft but certain. Madeline swallowed, her throat tight. She had braced herself for confrontation, for accusations, but this felt different. He was offering her the truth, not just his pain. She had to choose her words carefully. "I know," she whispered. "I don't want things to stay the same. But I don't know if we can fix this, Evan. I don't know if I can forgive you for the things you've kept from me." Evan nodded, the weight of her words settling between them. "I don't expect you to forgive me. Not right away. But I need you to know that I want to fix it. I'm not running away from this, and I'm not asking you to either." Her chest tightened. It was both a relief and a heartbreak. He wasn't asking for forgiveness yet, but he was willing to fight for it. And in that moment, she realized that she wasn't sure if she was ready to fight too. The pain was still so raw, the wounds too fresh. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Could they rebuild what had been broken? "I don't know if we're meant to be together anymore," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to lose us." The words hung in the air between them, a fragile hope in the midst of so much destruction. Evan didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached across the table, his hand brushing hers with a tenderness that spoke volumes. His eyes softened, but there was a guardedness there too, as if he were protecting himself from the pain he knew was still to come. "I don't know what the future holds either," he said quietly. "But I can't keep pretending that this doesn't matter, that we don't matter." Madeline closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. They couldn't go back to the way things were, not after everything, but they could try to move forward, piece by piece, if they were both willing to be honest with each other. "I'm scared, Evan," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I'm scared of what comes next, scared of what this does to us." Evan squeezed her hand, a quiet reassurance that spoke louder than words. "I'm scared too, but I'm willing to fight if you are." It wasn't a promise of perfection, nor was it an easy path they were walking. There would be more pain, more difficult conversations, more moments of doubt and mistrust. But for the first time in weeks, Madeline felt a flicker of hope. It was fragile, delicate, but it was there. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet tension, neither of them knowing exactly how to move forward. but there was a shift in the air, a subtle acknowledgement that, for better or worse, they were still connected. The future was uncertain, but they had taken the first step toward rebuilding something, whatever that might look like. As the weeks went by, Madeline and Evan tried to navigate the wreckage of their lives. The days passed, each one feeling like a careful reconstruction. They were still uncertain, still navigating the minefield of broken trust, but there was an underlying sense of resolve that had taken root in both of them. They had begun to communicate, more honestly, albeit awkwardly at times. There were moments of deep vulnerability where Madeline would cry, not out of anger or frustration, but because the weight of everything, Evan's betrayal, the pain of Claire's intrusion into their lives, still pressed heavily on her chest. Evan, for his part, tried his best to be there for her. He had started making small but meaningful gestures, taking on more household responsibilities, planning quiet evenings where they could reconnect. It wasn't grandiose, but it was sincere. His guilt was written all over him, and Madeline had no illusions about how much work it would take for him to rebuild the trust he had shattered. But still, the past lingered like a shadow, casting doubts even in their most peaceful moments. Madeline sometimes wondered if the air between them would ever be clear, or if they would always be walking through a haze of what had been broken. One evening, after a counseling session, they found themselves sitting on the porch, the sky darkening as the first stars began to show. Evan had his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close, though it felt like the kind of closeness that was still fragile, like something that might break if too much pressure was applied. "Do you think we can ever be the way we were before?" Madeline asked, her voice low, almost a whisper, as though testing the waters of a future she wasn't sure she wanted to believe in. Evan sighed, his breath a mixture of relief and sadness. "I don't know. I wish I could promise you that we could just go back to how it was, but I think we both know that's not possible." He paused, his fingers tracing circles on her arm. "But I don't think we have to be the same. We have to be better." The words were simple, but they carried a weight. Better. The idea of a better version of their marriage was something Madeline hadn't allowed herself to entertain until now. But she felt it. There was a change happening, slow and painful, but real. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again," she admitted, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. She wasn't sure why she said them. Maybe it was the vulnerability of the moment, or the fact that she had needed to get the truth out in the open. "But I still want to try. I don't want to throw everything away because of one mistake." Evan squeezed her tightly, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Madeline. Not yet. But I'll keep earning it. Every day. For as long as it takes." For a moment, they just sat there in the silence, letting the night wrap around them. The air between them was still thick with the remnants of their pain, but it felt different now, somehow. There was less resentment, less hostility. The edges were softening. But as much as Madeline wanted to believe in the possibility of their reconciliation, there was a part of her that couldn't entirely let go of the bitterness that had taken root, the lingering resentment of the way things had unfolded, how much she had been blindsided by everything, how far her trust had been stretched. Could it be rebuilt? Could she ever trust him the way she once had? The truth was, she didn't know. Weeks turned into months, and life began to take on a new rhythm. Madeline and Evan began to carve out small moments of normalcy. Dates, long talks over dinner, weekend trips that allowed them to rediscover each other. But there were still moments where the past would claw its way back into their minds. A certain glance, a pause in conversation, a phone call Evan took that Madeline didn't quite trust. These were the moments when the cracks would appear again, the fear that things might fall apart creeping in at the edges. And then, one day, Madeline found herself standing in the living room, holding a letter in her hands. It was an envelope from a law office, her lawyer's office to be exact. She had set things into motion weeks ago, unsure whether she was ready to take any drastic steps, but knowing that her own healing couldn't happen without taking control. She had decided to investigate the details of Claire's betrayal, hoping to uncover more truths that would help her understand just how deep the lies had gone. Opening the letter, she felt a chill run through her as the words unfolded. "Dear Ms. Benson, after reviewing the information you provided, we have found that the financial accounts in question associated with Mr. Evan Mercer have been investigated further. The findings suggest that there may be more to the relationship between your husband and Ms. Claire Donovan than initially disclosed." Her heart sank as she read further. The investigation had turned up something, a hidden account. Madeline sat in the quiet of her living room, Sarah's words echoing in her mind. "Choose you first." It sounded so simple, so obvious, but in the tangled mess of emotions and memories, it felt impossible. She looked at the half-empty coffee cup in front of her, the steam long gone, and felt the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. The evening stretched on, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. The hours seemed to pass slowly, each minute a reminder of the unknowns she was facing. The idea of reconciliation with Evan, of trying to fix the pieces of their broken marriage, was both comforting and terrifying. Could she forgive him? Could she forgive herself for allowing things to go so far? And if she chose to walk away, would it mean the end of everything she had ever known? As she thought about the years they had spent together, their first date, their wedding day, their son's first steps, she wondered how much of that was real, how much of their life had been built on trust, and how much had been built on lies. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced at it, hoping it wasn't Evan. It wasn't. It was her sister, Emma. Madeline hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than she had intended. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, concern lacing her tone. "You've been quiet lately. I heard about Evan. I know you're going through a lot." Madeline swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "I don't know, Emma. I'm just trying to figure it out. I don't even know where to start." "I know. I can't even imagine how hard it must be," Emma said sympathetically. "But I want you to know, I'm here for you, whatever you need." There was a pause before Emma added, "And if you need a place to stay, even just for a night, don't hesitate. You don't have to deal with this alone." Madeline felt a lump form in her throat. Her sister's offer was genuine, but she didn't want to burden anyone. The truth was, she wasn't sure where to go, or even who she was without Evan beside her. "I appreciate it," Madeline said quietly, her gaze moving to the window as the last of the light disappeared, leaving the world outside bathed in deep blue. "I just need some time. I think I need to be alone for a while." Emma didn't push. "I get it. Just know I'm here if you need me, and if you decide you want to talk, I'm just a call away." Madeline hung up, her mind swirling, with all the possibilities, all the things she had yet to figure out. The phone call had been a reminder that she wasn't alone, that she had people who cared, even if she didn't feel like herself right now. As night settled in, she sat down at the kitchen table, pen in hand, staring at a blank piece of paper. She had never been good at journaling, never taken to writing out her thoughts. But now, with everything spinning out of control, it felt like the only way to process it all. The pen hovered for a moment, then she began to write. "I've been married to Evan for over a decade. We've built a life together, a family, a home. But now, after everything that's happened, I wonder how much of it was real. The trust, the love. Was it just me seeing what I wanted to see? I keep thinking about the moments when I should have noticed. The late nights, the lies, the way he became distant, as if he were slowly slipping away from me and I never even saw it. Why didn't I see it? And now, I'm left with this. A betrayal that cuts deeper than anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just an affair. It was a complete dismantling of everything I thought I knew about him, about us. But where does that leave me? I keep asking myself if I can ever forgive him, if I can rebuild what we had. And if I'm being honest, I don't even know if I want to anymore. But there's still a part of me that wonders, can we fix this? Or is this the end? Madeline put the pen down, staring at the words in front of her. She didn't have the answers. She didn't even know if she was ready to look for them. But at least writing it out felt like a small step toward clarity, toward understanding her own heart in the midst of everything. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text message from Evan. She stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. I'm sorry, Madeline. I wish I could go back and undo everything. But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. She felt her chest tighten at the message, at the rawness in his words. It was easy to see how much he regretted what he'd done, how much he wanted to fix it all. But did she even want him to fix it? Madeline's fingers hovered over the screen as she considered replying. But before she could, another message came through. This one was from her lawyer. Madeline, we've gathered some information on Evan's business dealings. There are some things I think you should know, things that might change the way you view the situation. Madeline felt a jolt in her chest. She stared at the message, her heart racing.